Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. We've got a new report by Robert Lyman on the proposed Teck Resources Frontier Oil Sands project. Robert Lyman was a public servant in Canada for 27 years and also served for 10 years as a diplomat. Much of his work was related to greenhouse gas emissions and economic implications of related climate and energy policies. Let me give you an overview of what Robert Lyman wrote. The federal government will soon announce whether it will approve the project, Teck Resources Oil Sands Mine. According to press reports, the government is likely to reject it, although it may instead demand a quid pro quo from Alberta, requiring Alberta to change its current climate policies to more closely align with federal policies. According to evidence gathered by the panel, the project will produce about 260,000 barrels per day of bitumen and operate for 41 years. Over that time, it will provide 278,000 person-years of employment across Canada and yield $70 billion in tax and royalty revenue to governments. It will also emit 4.1 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, which represents 5.4% of oil sands emissions based on 2016 data, or about 0.5% of total Canadian emissions. Teck has committed to make all of its operations carbon neutral by 2050. The panel recommended approval of the project, subject to over 200 conditions. The Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, implied in his recent public statements that federal approval might depend on whether the province of Alberta committed to more aggressive emissions mitigation policies, including tougher targets and dropping the legal opposition to federal carbon dioxide taxes. There have been press leaks suggesting that the federal cabinet is preparing to deny the Frontier project, but compensate Alberta in some way. Robert Lyman goes on to say, the way the federal government has handled this case contravenes several principles of good public policy. It is single-mindedly adhering to a fundamentally flawed climate policy based on questionable science and ignoring the reality that Canada produces only 1.6% of greenhouse gas emissions in a world where emissions are growing steadily due to economic developments in Asia. It has made GHG mitigation the overriding goal of public policy, downplaying the many other economic, social, security, and unity goals that we share as a country. It has adopted policies that place an inordinately adverse impact on one region, Alberta and Saskatchewan, penalizing them for taking advantage of their natural resource endowment. By apparently holding the Frontier project hostage to Alberta's acceptance of changes in other policies, it has engaged in the long discredited practice of policy linkage. Good public policy is far more likely to result from objective analysis of the public interest in each issue, not a highly politicized bargaining process involving unrelated issues. Turning down the Teck project would have absolutely zero impact on the trends in global GHG emissions. It would serve only as a symbolic, extremely costly gesture of commitment to green ideology.
The current statistics are that 89% of the world's energy supply comes from fossil fuels. And further, according to the United States Energy Information Administration, which is probably the foremost expert in terms of projecting energy supply and demand and emissions in future, that will continue to be the case until at least 2040. By 2040, they predict that the share held by fossil fuels in world energy consumption will be about 80%. So it will decline, but not massively.
And I'd like to add the following. Despite the federal government and several cities declaring a climate emergency, Roger Pielke Jr. has recently shown that this is based on flawed interpretation of certain computer simulations promoted by green billionaires. These mainstream scientists have called for the media and IPCC scientists to stop the climate emergency and climate deadline hysteria, reporting that the IPCC report, which Greta Thunberg cites, never said such apocalyptic things. And a group of more than 800 scientists of Clintel, the Climate Intelligence Group, which includes 9 Nobel laureates in science, have also stated there's no climate emergency. We do have time, and that net zero 2050 would be economic suicide for all of us. Public policy should be fair and equitable and not based on ideology over evidence. Please read this report. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.